Welcome to Canadian Innovators, the show that celebrates innovation, entrepreneurs, and the Canadian spirit. I'm Jocelyn, and every week we introduce a new entrepreneur or expert on the economy to tell their stories and unpack the challenges of keeping jobs in Canada, as well as discuss potential solutions for job growth and prosperity. Today on the program, we're going to learn about the Canadian ship repair and construction company, Heddle Shipyards. Heddle Shipyards has operated shipyards in Canada for over 30 years with facilities across the Great Lakes. Heddle Shipyards is on course to be recognized as the most reliable provider of ship repair services in Canada. Joining us to give us an understanding of the Canadian shipbuilding industry is Shaun Padulo, president of Heddle Shipyards. Shaun joined Heddle Shipyards in 2017 and assumed the role of president in June 2018. Shaun's brought 10 years of experience in the marine and offshore contracting sector, starting his career as a deckhand on a tugboat sailing the Great Lakes. Shaun departed Canada in 2011 and held various commercial roles for Dutch firms working in the Netherlands, where he specialized in logistical management, as well as the transportation and installation of offshore production structures. Shaun has also lived and worked in Houston, Texas, focusing on offshore installation projects and offshore decommissioning projects and subsea inspection, repair, and maintenance projects. Shaun is an alumnus of the Erasmus University of Rotterdam. I hope I got that right. The University of British Columbia in Vancouver and McMaster University in Hamilton. Shaun holds a Master of Science in Maritime Economics and Logistics. Welcome to the program, Shaun. That is quite a resume. I'm amazed that you started as a deckhand. So I just, before we get into it, I want to hear a little bit about life as a deckhand.
Certainly, Jocelyn. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here today and to be part of the Canadian Innovators series. Being a deckhand, that was actually one of the most fun points of my career. So in high school and during university, during the summers, I had the opportunity to sail on board tugboats on the Great Lakes. I was doing a lot of runs from Hamilton down to Burns Harbor, so Chicago, and doing a whole bunch of different activities, salvage work and dead ship tows, and it was a lot of fun. You're basically on board of a ship with a whole bunch of different crew members. You become really good friends, and it's a great way to spend your summers, to be honest.
Well, I'm sure you've got great stories, but we want to hear about Heddle Shipyards today. So give us a little bit of history on Heddle Shipyards.
Certainly. Well, when you talk about great Canadian innovators, I'm fortunate enough to work for two of them. So the two owners of Heddle, Mr. Rick Heddle and Mr. Blair McKeel, are innovators. And if you look at Rick's history, it's really the history of Heddle Shipyards. He started the company when he was 18 years old, wow, which is pretty incredible. Today, we're the largest operator of shipyards on the Canadian side of the Great Lakes. He went from one employee himself to our peak is about 400. And so it's pretty amazing and remarkable. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg for us. And so the history of Heddle, 1987, the company gets started, one-person operation down in Hamilton Harbor, and slowly started to build up. And then Rick's partner, Blair, who wasn't the partner when he first started, saw an opportunity because Blair had a fleet of tugboats and barges and said, well, Rick's pretty good at fixing these things. Maybe we should partner. And so they did. And Rick, being the true MacGyver that he is, actually was a commercial diver in addition to running a shipyard operation, and salvaged a couple of barges. And he then turned those barges into what our first floating dry dock was. And so a floating dry dock basically sinks under the water and picks up a ship or a barge or a tugboat. And so with that asset, Rick started fixing Blair's fleet and also started fixing the fleet of other operators in the Great Lakes. And he did a good job, and his reputation started growing and growing. Flash forward a number of years, and 3 floating dry docks later in Hamilton to about 2012, Heddle expanded out to the East Coast and really took advantage of a lot of the offshore oil and gas opportunities that were going on at the time. And that propelled us even further, and we started looking at something called the National Shipbuilding Strategy. So this is an incredible government procurement that's been designed to rebuild the fleets of the Royal Canadian Navy and the Canadian Coast Guard. And so a lot of those vessels are larger than what we could handle in Hamilton. And so we started looking at different shipyards that used to be in operation in Ontario. And at one time, Ontario was the epicenter for ship construction in all of Canada. You had places like Collingwood, which was pumping out ships, Thunder Bay, and Port Weller. So in 2016, Rick and Blair decided to purchase the Thunder Bay Shipyard. And when they did that,
So we're going to go to commercial because we need to take a break. But when we get back, we're going to hear all about Heddle Shipyards. We're going to see some pictures. Don't go away. You're watching Canadian Innovators. Welcome back. You're watching Canadian Innovators. Joining me today is Shaun Padulo, who's the president of Heddle Shipyards. Shaun, before we went to break, we were talking about Heddle Shipyards, what you do and who you do it for. We're going to look at some pictures that you brought with us, and we're going to get you to describe what it is that Heddle does.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So tell us what we're seeing here.
Fantastic. So that's actually the logo for Heddle Shipyards. And it's fairly new. We had the same logo for about 30 years, and when I joined in 2017, my role was in the commercial marketing space. And because we had expanded so much and went from one shipyard to multiple shipyards on the Great Lakes, we decided we needed to rebrand. And so that image that you're seeing right now is actually a shot of the Port Weller Dry Docks, which has been turned into sort of a clip art type piece. And so that's a ship in the Port Weller Dry Docks, which was at one time one of the largest shipyards in operation in Canada.
Okay, so let's see the next picture. We're going to see some people actually manufacturing. Tell us what we're seeing this gentleman do.
Absolutely. So this gentleman has actually been with us for over 30 years. It's John Alves, an incredible guy, and he specializes in heavy mechanical work. And so what you're seeing him do right there is use a chain fall to pull a tail shaft out of a ship. And this was actually an Algoma ship that was in the yard not too long ago. And so a tail shaft is connected to the propeller, and it moves the propeller. You got to pull it out every once in a while when we're doing our regular maintenance work, and that's what John's doing in that photo.
Very neat. Next picture, what are we seeing here?
This is some more mechanical work that's being done in our shop. So again, on that G3 Marquis project, there was a number of different mechanical items that would have come off the ship, and Binu is doing some work on them right now. It's a great photo, and you can see some tail shafts in the background, actually, to give you a size and a scale of what we're dealing with.
Those are pretty big shafts. On the next picture, we're going to see.
Excellent. So here's some cutting. So this is one of our welders, actually, Samantha. And what she's doing in this photo is she's cutting pieces out of a sheet of steel. And wherever that steel is going to go, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm sure she's doing a good job because she's a great welder.
That's great. We'd love to have the women involved in industry.
Certainly.
This is an incredible picture. Tell us about this.
This is one of the most incredible shots I think we're probably going to look at today. So this is a picture of winter in Port Weller, not this past winter, but the previous. And it was the first time in the shipyard that 3 ships had come back to be worked on during the winter work period. At one time, that shipyard had 2,000 people. When we took it over, it was completely bankrupt and closed down, and they hadn't really operated at full capacity for a long time. So what this picture screams to me is the shipyard's back, operating full capacity. We've got 3 CSL ships, and those 3 vessels actually, the center sections of them were built in that shipyard.
Yeah, and it's incredible. We're bringing back industry. Canada has a great history as being an innovator in the Canadian shipbuilding, so this is great. So let's look at the next picture.
Excellent. So this is another one of my favorite shots. So that's a Canadian Coast Guard ship, and behind it you see a Canada Steamship Line ship. And so what that says to me is that Heddle, we don't just focus on government work or commercial work, we focus on both. And I think that's really important because a number of the larger yards are completely focusing on government work, but we can't forget that in Canada we've got great entrepreneurs, innovative companies, and so it's important that we respect and service those companies as well because that CSL ship is moving vital resources across the Great Lakes, and it's extremely important to our economy.
Yeah, and we've learned how important supply chain is during the pandemic, so that's great stuff there. Our next slide, tell us what we're seeing here.
Well, so this is a really good shot. So the original shot you saw of John using a chain fall to move the tail shaft, this is a zoomed out version of that, and you can see how large that tail shaft actually is. It's pretty monumental.
So it must take incredible precision and skill to be able to work on these intricate pieces. What do we have next here?
That's great. This is just another shot of another Coast Guard ship, and actually a different CSL ship, so this was what it would have been from a few years ago. And what you're looking at right now is the bottom of our floating dry dock, our graving dock. We have floating dry docks in Hamilton. The blocks that you're seeing is actually where the ship rests on. So eventually this whole dry dock would have been flooded with water. The ship would have come in just like a garage, and then we would have drained the water out, and then the ship rests on those blocks. And that's how we can work on the underwater portion of the ship.
Very neat. So we have about 30 seconds left. Let's see if we can get through the rest of this slide. This one's pretty impressive.
It is one of my favorite shots. So the Canadian Coast Guard is one of our biggest clients, and this was a pretty monumental shot because we're doing 2 major refits on 2 Canadian Coast Guard icebreakers at the same time in our shipyard in Hamilton.
So I think we can get one more in.
Great. And that's just another shot of the CSL ships in our facility. And actually that's the docking operation. So the ship's coming in for actual work in the wintertime.
It's incredible what you do. So we're going to go to break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about innovation and all the things that you do and some of your next projects. Don't go away. You're watching Canadian Innovators. Welcome back to Canadian Innovators, and we're talking about the Canadian shipbuilding and support industry, and I'm here with Shaun Padulo from Heddle Shipbuilding. Welcome, Shaun, back from the break. Before we went to the break, we saw some pictures of what you're doing, and I know that we have great innovation in Canada, and I know that Heddle's part of that. Why don't you talk to us about some of your innovation?
Certainly. I mean, I think when you talk about great innovation, it always boils down to the people who are driving the innovation. And again, you know, we've got some great owners that were very innovative. And if you look at some of the supervisors and superintendents that we've had over the years, pretty incredible the things that they've been able to pull off. I think the shipbuilding and ship repair industry on the Great Lakes has always gone through boom and bust, and Heddle's been around for 35 years and hasn't really gone with those boom and bust cycles. So I think it's a testament to those people. What I'm most excited about in terms of innovation now is we're embarking actually as of March 1st on the Ontario Shipyard Modernization project, which is an internal project that we're doing at Heddle, which is effectively seeing robotic welding systems come into play, robotic blasting and coating systems that we're going to be doing for the external hulls of ships. We're looking at a ton of different technology that we're bringing in because I think an important part of being an innovator is you're always looking at changing, even if you are successful with what you're doing currently. And so that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we're seeing a resurgence of the Canadian shipbuilding program. We have such innovation. I know that you started your career in Netherlands and they kind of had taken over that space, but I really think that Canada can reemerge as really a leader in shipbuilding, both in products and in service. So we're going to talk about that today. But I really want to get inside the employees of Heddle. I know that you had some employee that you wanted to profile, so love to hear about it.
It's tough, right? When you have 200 employees, you really want to profile everyone because we are, you know, a team. Everyone's sort of working in sync. You talked a little bit about it earlier, though. It's always great to see females in a traditionally male-dominated industry step up. And so we've got, you know, our director of project management, who's on the executive team, Alicia Nash, has been kicking butt. She's got a team of project managers and engineers that are working with her right now that are really revolutionizing the things that we're doing in the shipyards. I mean, you've got people that have been here for 30 plus years, some 40, including people like Jim Ashley and John Elves and John Menz and Brian Seeks and people that have really understood and know what right looks like. And so I wish I had the time to talk about all 200 employees. I know we don't have that much time today, but it's just a great team. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I mean, let's hear it for the girls. I heard that story, and saw the picture of the
Sam.
gal welding.
Yeah.
I love it. It's great. There's so much innovation in manufacturing. We need to bring the gals back in. But I wanted to pivot here and talk about something that's affecting absolutely all of our innovators, and that's supply chain. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges of supply chain and what you're seeing out in the marketplace?
Certainly. I mean, I think anyone that says they're not dealing with issues right now, I think would probably be underestimating the impacts of the supply chain challenges. You know, the global economy was really shook by different aspects and things that have happened in the last few years, COVID being one of them. You're now seeing, you know, increasing pressure on the markets because of geopolitical events that are happening in the Ukraine. And so I think what that's leading us to realize is that we really have to start looking locally. And so our supply chain was pretty robust locally. and we're just trying to build that up now. I mean, there's an incredible company that we're dealing with in Pickering called ACL, and they have some of the most futuristic coding applications that we've seen. They're doing work for the Navy in the States, the Navy in Canada, and they were in our backyard, and we didn't really know about it. And so I think it's important for all Canadian innovators to look at what's happening locally around them so that we can all reduce our carbon footprints, but also build up a more reliable supply chain.
Yeah, amazing. And full disclosure, that's my husband's company, and we do have the best coding system in the world. But it's great that some of the large shipbuilding programs are bringing in the supply chain, small, medium-sized business. So we've got about a minute left. Talk to us about what Heddle does to shore up that supply chain and bring in those small to medium-sized businesses.
Certainly. Look, if you look at some of the projects we're taking on now, it's in the public domain. So the CCGS at Munson that we're currently refitting in Port Weller, it's going to be close to a $13 million project.
So tell the viewers what the CCGS
Canadian
is.
Coast Guard ship. Yeah,
Perfect.
Sorry, acronyms in our business are, there's a lot of them. So the Canadian Coast Guard ship at Munson, it's a $12 million, $13 million refit project. There's just no way for us to handle that all internally. It doesn't make sense, especially because we're in sort of the industrial heartland of Canada, right? We've got Hamilton, St. Catharines, and all of the outlying areas. There's some great companies around here, Pickering being one of them as well, ACL.
Scarborough. We have
Scarborough,
to give a shout out to
Scarborough,
but close to Pickering.
Certainly. And so what we're doing is we're bringing in a ton of different companies. In that project alone, probably 60% of the revenue on that project is outsourced to our local supply chain.
Welcome back. Joining me today is Shaun Padulo, CEO of Heddle Shipyards, and we're talking about the Canadian shipbuilding industry. Shaun, let's talk about some of the challenges that you've had in operating a business in Canada today, because I know there's just a full suite of them, but talk about the ones that are really affecting you.
Absolutely. I think that sometimes, and maybe not purposefully, Canada makes it difficult for businesses to operate. And that's sort of some of the legislative requirements that they have, and some of the things that we do that our competitors don't necessarily have to do, or that other governments globally are doing to protect their industries. So for example, we're competing against shipyards in the United States. They really have a captive market because vessels are essentially forced to go to those shipyards. We don't have those same type of protectionist laws here. If you go to shipyards in Asia where a lot of the commercial operators are going to build their ships, they don't have the same health and safety standards that we do, which I'm happy that we have the standards that we do, but I think sometimes we price ourselves out of the market with some of the other requirements that we force on our businesses. So I think that's a challenge for sure.
So we hear a lot about the shipbuilding program in the media, and a lot of them are very negative on the shipbuilding program. I think it's an amazing program because it really fosters Canadian innovation. So what would you say to those folks that are all negative on the Canadian shipbuilding program?
I would say that we had two shipyards that we recently took over, Port Weller and Thunder Bay, that are now going concerns again because of the National Shipbuilding Strategy. So this program to rebuild the fleets for the Navy and the Coast Guard is extremely important. Has it gone off without a hitch? Definitely not. But I don't know of many projects of this size and scale that would have. Effectively, their mandate was to rebuild the Canadian shipbuilding and ship repair industry. And that's a pretty big and hefty task.
Yeah, and we're absolutely seeing what's happening in Russia. There's lots of concern about our sovereignty in the north and the Arctic. And so we really need to make sure that we're on our game so that we can protect our sovereignty. But I'm going to tell you, we're going to my favorite part of the program, and that is when I put my guests in the hot seat and say, if you were a politician, what were the three things that you would do to protect jobs and growth and help prosperity in the economy? So you're on the hot seat, you're the politician, give me your three things.
Certainly. So you talked about Arctic sovereignty. The government has the budget through the National Shipbuilding Strategy to fix and build new ships. I think that there is a lack of resources right now within the different government entities, being the Coast Guard or the Navy or PSPC, which is basically, the entity that's running all these programs. I think they've really they need to get resources there so they can start rolling these projects out. Because industries here are waiting. We have times where the shipyard's completely empty, and it's very difficult to maintain a business when you have an empty shipyard. So I think that that's one thing that I would certainly do. I would look at sort of relaxing some of the legislative requirements that they do have and put in place, because I think, again, we do a lot of things to hurt businesses sometimes as opposed to help them. And I would foster innovation. I think that there are incentives that we could introduce in Canada, like you've seen in other jurisdictions, like the United States, like in Singapore, that really benefit the shipyards. And so if we started looking, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. They're doing it in other places in the world. And so I think we need to look globally for some of the innovative ideas that those governments are implementing and do the same thing here in Canada.
We absolutely have to protect our industry. We have about a minute left, and I want to hear about the projects that you're most proud about, that you're working on now and you're going to be working on in the future.
Certainly. So I would say the two streams I'm most excited about are the Coast Guard Vessel Life Extensions, VLEs. So we're currently bidding on the CCGS, Canadian Coast Guard ship Terry Fox, which would be an 18-month-long project that would be in Port Weller. And we're essentially, if you imagine a home renovation, stripping the ship right down to the studs and then rebuilding it, which I'm very excited about. And then our new build program is, I think, the future of Heddle and the future of Ontario Shipyards. We're looking at building ferries for Toronto Island, and we're also looking at building ships for the Canadian Coast Guard. And I think those, three different buckets are really what's going to propel us into the future.
Yeah, very neat, great technology, great innovation. I've absolutely enjoyed talking to you about the Canadian Shipbuilding Program. We need to protect that. We need to protect our sovereignty. We need to protect Canadian jobs. And we need to make sure that we have more shipyards versus less. And I've been so excited that I've seen the growth and bringing on some of these new shipyards onto the shipbuilding program. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to my guest, Shaun Padulo of Heddle Shipyards. The Canadian shipbuilding industry is an important and growing industry in Canada, and it's critical to both the safety and security of Canada, and something Canadians need to support. I'm Jocelyn Bamford. Thank you for watching Canadian Innovators, and we'll see you next time.